At 4:44 on a Sunday morning, Romanian radar picked up an intruder, a drone crossing in from neighboring Moldova. At 5:01, a Spanish fighter pilot flying a NATO patrol in Romanian sky pressed the trigger and shot it down. 17 minutes. Detection to kill. Now rewind 3 years. Since 2023, this same country had been finding Russian drone wreckage in its fields, and for nearly 3 years, it never fired a single shot. Not once until this summer. Even in September 2025, when a drone wandered its sky for 50 minutes with 2 fighters flying right alongside, nobody fired. Same radars, same jets. What was missing was never the hardware. It was paper, and not one sheet of it, but a whole stack. The law that allows the shot, the rules that say who orders it, the procedure a pilot can actually follow at 4 in the morning. Romania spent 3 years assembling that stack. This is the story of what's written in it, and of the hole in the map that the stack still doesn't cover, because the drone's route that Sunday through a neighbor that doesn't own a single fighter jet was no accident. Here is that Sunday in detail, the 16th of August. The drone entered about 24 kilometers north of the city of Galați, coming from Moldova's side. The Spanish F-18 on NATO air policing duty made radar contact, received authorization, and downed it over an uninhabited area. The 4th drone Romania has shot down this year. In late July, its own F-16s downed 3 drones in 3 days, the first shoot-downs in the country's history. 2 days before the Spanish shot, an Italian fighter downed a drone over Latvia. NATO's assessment, in its own careful words, the drone appears to be Russian. The origin is formally still under investigation. Moldova identified it as a Shahed type. Russia denies it. And be careful with this sky in general. The same month, a Ukrainian decoy drone strayed into Bulgaria. Wreckage over this flank arrives from both sides of the war. Remember that, because the pilot deciding at 4:45 does not yet know whose drone it is, and this is not one country's story. Zoom out to September 2025, Poland. At least 19 drones crossed the border in a single night. Polish and Allied jets shot several down. The first time in history, NATO forces had fired on Russian military hardware over alliance territory. Poland invoked Article 4, the alliance's formal alarm bell. Within days, NATO launched a new operation, Eastern Sentry, to shuffle jets and sensors along the whole eastern flank. Before that night, Europe had spent 2 years collecting drone debris in its fields without firing a shot. The usual headline writes itself: Russia is testing NATO's resolve. That may well be true, but it explains the attacker, not the defense. And the more useful question is what exactly kept tying the defender's hands. It wasn't radar coverage. The drones were seen. It wasn't jets. They were airborne, flying alongside. What tied their hands each time was rules, 3 of them written down long before any drone took off. Rule 1. The law of peacetime skies was written for aircraft with humans inside. Here is what the rulebook tells a fighter pilot to do with an intruder in peacetime. Approach it, identify it, rock the wings, make radio contact, escort it, force it to land. It's a conversation between people. A drone cannot hold that conversation. It doesn't answer the radio. It doesn't follow an escort, and it has nobody on board to arrest. The only thing you can actually do to it is destroy it. And destroying something in peacetime is exactly what the old rules never clearly allowed. Not over your own villages, not without someone specific carrying the blame if the wreckage lands on a house. That was Romania's first 2 years of debris. No legal trigger existed at all. So Romania wrote itself the permission. 2 laws passed in February 2025, enforced by May. Destruction, the text says, is the last resort. And now comes the part that shows how deep the paper goes. The statute alone changed nothing visible. 4 months after it came into force, that drone flew its 50 minutes with the law already on the books. The pilots that day even received authorization to fire. They still didn't, after weighing the risk to people below. Because a statute is a permission, not a manual. It says destruction is the last resort. It does not say how to build a lawful shot. The target must be identified visually. The debris must fall on no one. The missile must not cross into a neighbor's sky, and the windows where all of that is true at once last a few minutes. Building those windows, the tactics, the procedures, the drills took another year. Romania's military later said it in its own words, "We developed the tactics and procedures, and now we can eliminate this threat." In May 2026, a drone carrying explosives hit an apartment roof in Galați and injured 2 people. 2 months later came the first shootdown. 14 months after the law, the drone of 2025 wasn't faster than the jets. It was faster than the paperwork, and the paperwork turned out to be a stack, not a sheet. And Poland? It fired that September, the month of the 50-minute flight, without any new drone law, because 19 machines in one night reads as plain self-defense under rules that already existed. It's the single, slow, ambiguous intruder whose origin the pilot cannot even be sure of, that the old rules never answered. That borderline case is exactly what the new pages are for, which is why Warsaw too sat down to write its own. Rule 2, even inside NATO, the trigger is national. The alliance shares almost everything else, the radar picture, the patrols themselves. Romania's sky is guarded in rotation by allied squadrons, Spanish, Italian, and others. But the decision to fire and the legal liability for what falls out of the sky afterwards belong to the country whose ground lies below. That Spanish pilot fired under Romanian authorization by Romanian law over Romanian fields. 32 members means 32 airspaces and 32 statutes, each moving through its own parliament at its own speed. The defense is collective, the trigger is not. Rule 3, the map has a hole. Moldova sits between the war and NATO's border, and Moldova is neutral by its own constitution, has no air policing arrangement with anyone, and owns no fighters at all. It inherited 31 MiG-29s from the Soviet Union and had sold them off, most to the United States, by the late 90s. Europe has gifted it a modern French radar and 60 million euros of short-range equipment. So Moldova can now see what crosses its sky. It still cannot reach most of it. A corridor, in other words. And the routes have learned it, that Sunday's drone did not come straight from the war's direction, it came through the seam. And under all 3 rules sits an amplifier, arithmetic. The drone costs somewhere between $20,000 and $50,000. The missile that killed it costs about $400,000. The bigger interceptors run into millions. Russia builds roughly 3,000 of these drones a month. Even a perfect night of air defense, every intruder downed, is a losing trade at that exchange rate. 3 ways to restitch this, and each pays in a different currency. Design 1, one sky, one trigger. Take Eastern Sentry to its logical end, standing pre-agreed engagement rules for the whole flank with authority delegated in advance, so a drone entering any member's sky meets the same response within the same minutes, no matter whose parliament last met. The currency is sovereignty over lethal force. Each country must hand a piece of the decision to shoot over its own towns to a shared chain of command. And when wreckage one day lands on a school, the address of responsibility sits abroad. That is the very last thing states like to give away, which is why the trigger is still national today. Design 2, patch the hole, arm the neutral. Europe is already paying. The radar, the 60 million euros, the next step would be missiles that reach and data links that tie Moldova's picture into NATO's. The currency is the neutrality itself. It's written into Moldova's constitution, Article 11. Every gifted battery strains it, hands Moscow a ready-made escalation story, and rests on nothing but goodwill, because there is no treaty behind it. A gift is not a guarantee, and nobody is obliged to defend the country that plugs the hole. Design 3, match the price. Europe's answer on paper is called the drone wall, a planned network of sensors, jammers, and cheap interceptors along the eastern flank, one of the EU's flagship projects, drawing directly on Ukraine's experience. Ukrainian interceptor drones cost about $1,400 each, hit 9 times out of 10, and are built by the thousand every month, 1,400 against 20,000. Finally, arithmetic that favors the defender. The currency is time and side effects. The wall doesn't exist yet. Launch keeps being promised for this year, full coverage for the end of next, while the drones fly now, jamming over inhabited areas, breaks GPS for ambulances and airliners, not just intruders, and Germany's own defense minister warns that a wall alone is not a defense. Walls, historically, get flown around. None of the three excludes the others. The real design question is the order, and whether the paperwork gets there before the next drone does. So come back to those 17 minutes on a Sunday morning. They were not bought with a newer missile or a better radar. They were bought with a stack of paper assembled over 3 years, the statute at the bottom, the engagement rules above it, the drills above those. That finally told a pilot in a peacetime sky, "You may, and here is exactly how." That is the strange shape of modern air defense. It is a stack of documents before it is a stack of missiles. So the next time a drone over Europe is in the headlines, and there will be a next time, the revealing questions aren't about the drone. Whose law owns the trigger in that particular sky, and has it actually been written yet? Where is the seam on the map, the neutral gap, the unpatrolled corridor? Because every defense map has one, and the routes always find it. And what does one defensive shot cost against what the intruder cost? Until those three answers change, the drones will keep choosing the same route.